By the time he died, he had created a one-party, one-ideology state and an elaborate system of control. But under Lenin, the aim of socialism had not yet been achieved. His successor, Joseph Stalin, inherited a society in which large parts of the old Russia survived. Peasants were still able to sell the produce they farmed themselves in the markets. Stalin was determined to complete the building of socialism. So he launched the first 5-year plan to modernize the economy. It was a call for mobilization to create the heavy industries the Soviet Union needed to defend itself in a hostile world. Construction worker Tatyana Fyodorova was held up as an example to others.
We live so well. Our hearts are so joyful. In no other country are there such happy young people as us. We're the happiest young people. And on behalf of all young people, I want to thank our party and our dear comrade Stalin for this joy that we have. Stalin set a task. Build this or build that. And thanks to the fact that people trusted him and this enthusiasm of young people, it was possible. Remember, this was a country where people were illiterate, lived in virtual darkness, wore birch bark shoes. Even now, I think it's like something out of a fairy tale. How was it possible at one of the most difficult times to raise these great construction sites? It was only possible through the unity of the people and the love of the people for their idol. Because for us, Stalin was an idol.
With so much to build so quickly, workers were sent all over the country to fulfill the plan. Tens of thousands went beyond the Ural Mountains to start construction of a giant new steelworks. They saw themselves as pioneers. For Valentina Mikova and Mikhail Arkhipov, these were the most fulfilling days of their lives.
На строительстве домен был один экскаватор, и то плохой.
There was one excavator at the blast furnace building site, and it wasn't always reliable. So we dug all the foundations by hand. The trench would be teeming with people. One takes the earth, throws it to the level above. The second person throws it to the third to the fourth, up to 5 or 6 levels. That was how we got the earth out of the trench. Then it was taken away in wheelbarrows.
Magnitogorsk was modeled on a plant in America. Among the workers were thousands of forced laborers, and all lived in terrible conditions.
The beds were in one large room, shared by up to 200 people, often whole families together. There were wooden lavatories outside and a communal kitchen. Water was rationed, and we had to get that outside as well. I think that we, the first construction workers of Magnitogorsk, were united by the difficulties we all faced. We were already schooled in our Soviet traditions. We felt the whole economy was ours, that we were the bosses, that we were working for ourselves.
The Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw toured the Soviet Union, visiting factories and farms with Lady Astor. Shaw wrote in a hotel visitor's book, "Tomorrow I leave this land of hope and return to our Western countries of despair." When he got back, he claimed Russia had been maligned.
We have rebuked her ungodliness, and now the sun shines on Russia as on a country with which God is well pleased, whilst his wrath is heavy on us, and we don't know where to turn for comfort or reproof.
Soviet newsreels showed Stalin as a genial figure, head of the family of nationalities who made up the new workers' state. But he was ruthless with anyone who challenged him. He demanded cooperation at all levels. Millions of Russians, the church was still a source of strength and offered the only alternative system of beliefs. The communists saw the church as a challenge and intensified their attacks on it. Village priests were ridiculed and harassed and forced to renounce their faith. The greatest threat to the life of the peasants came when Stalin decided to end private farming. He thought their methods were too inefficient to raise the food the country now needed. A campaign was organized against the richer peasants, the so-called kulaks, who were said to be opposing Stalin's plans. Kulak farmers were rounded up. Stalin said the kulaks should be liquidated as a class. Over 3 million were shot or died in exile or the camps. The state seized the farm implements of all the peasants. They took over all the land, which was now to be farmed collectively in large units. But the peasants didn't want collectivization. They killed their livestock rather than give them up, and the state took the grain. The result was famine. Over 5 years, 7 million died of starvation. These were scenes that Bernard Shaw and other Western visitors did not see. The price was not mentioned when Stalin listed socialism's achievements in 1937.
На наших фабриках и заводах работает весь капиталист. Работают труженики фабрики и заводов. Руководят фабриками и заводами люди из народа. Это и называется у нас социализмом на деле. На наших полях работают труженики земли, без помещиков, без кулаков. Руководят этими работами люди из народа. Это и называется у нас социализмом в быту.
It was said Stalin's ovations were so long because nobody dared to be seen as the first to stop clapping. For Stalin was not just using harsh methods to push through changes he thought were essential. He was obsessed with destroying all potential opponents. The leader of the first workers' state lived in reclusive comfort. He felt insecure even about those closest to him. One by one, the most senior communists who had planned the political and social transformation of the country became his victims. Nikolai Bukharin had helped Stalin to power, but then dared to criticize him. At first, Bukharin was isolated in his Kremlin flat with his young wife. He remained a loyal communist even when the moment of arrest came.
It was terrifying, tragic. He literally fell down on his knees before me and asked forgiveness for ruining my life. He said that if he could ever have imagined that his life would end this way, he would have run as far as possible away from me. No matter how strong his love, he would have suppressed it. He asked me never to forget his letter, which is now called his testament, and without fail to bring up his son, a Bolshevik. That's the kind of faith he had, a Bolshevik to the end.
Суд идет, прошу встать. Садитесь, пожалуйста.
Bukharin's fate was sealed at one of a series of show trials specially designed as propaganda events to create fear and instill obedience. The trials were a concoction of fake evidence and false accusations. Confessions were forced through torture and threats to the victims' families. Officials and journalists in the courtroom played their part in the same drama.
Вся наша страна от малого до старого ждет и требует одного: изменников и шпионов, продавших врагу нашу родину, расстрелять как поганых псов.
Stalin's morbid paranoia grew. Nobody at any level of life in the country, regardless of whether they were in the party or not, was safe. From his desk, the Great Terror was controlled and conducted. Secret police orders gave every region an arbitrary quota for the purges. Category 1 meant death. Category 2 meant the prison camps. But at times Stalin grew impatient. When he scribbled, "Give a supplementary quota of 6,000 people in the first category to Krasnodar," he was signing the death warrant for an extra 6,000 on top of the previous target. The purges struck many of the earliest enthusiasts for communism. Mikhail Minlin, in Category 2, was arrested and interrogated by the secret police in Moscow.
When the interrogation began, I was asked to sign lies about myself and good comrades from my region. They handed me a list of 47 people. They wanted to get me to sign a statement. I wouldn't. They kept me standing for 5 days. Day and night. My legs were so swollen.
At the height of the purges, ordinary people were required to take part in mass demonstrations against enemies of the people. Mass shipments of prisoners continued for years. They filled thousands of camps in the remotest and most inhospitable parts of the Soviet Union. Prisoners became an essential part of the workforce, slave labor for the new mines and railways, being forced through regardless.
First I worked on the BAM railway, then in Kolyma. The important thing was not to die of hunger.
Баланду тебе давали. Баланда это суп без всякой, ну там плавает.
They gave you balanda, a soup with just a few fish bones and some oats floating around.
Мы эту баланду выпивали через.
We drank from metal bowls. They gave us a ladle of balanda and a lump of bread.
Вот так вот выпивали его и пайку хлеба. Еле-еле нас заставлял холод работать еще, потому что если
we could hardly work for the cold. If we didn't move or work, we would have frozen.
Никаких там уколов, никаких.
There were no injections, anything to reduce pain. They didn't even have proper scalpels.
Даже не было операционных скальпелей. У меня, например, на лагпункте на
When I was in the camp, they asked me to hold out my frostbitten foot, and with pliers, they just took chunks out. That was the treatment, the operation.
И все. Вот и все лечение, вся операция. И тот, кто первую зиму.
It was considered that if you survived the first winter, you'd get through your sentence. Most people didn't survive.
Большинство не выдерживало.
Stalin's henchmen tried to justify what was happening.
Мы можем прямо сказать, что НКВД своей разобщительной работой раскрытия шпионских организаций не только спас много жизней, которым угрожала опасность от врагов, шпионов, диверсантов, разведчиков.
On the surface, for those of its people it had not devoured, the great communist experiment could claim to have achieved some of its aims by the end of the 1930s. The vast majority were able to read. Great construction projects like the Moscow Metro had been completed, whatever the cost. And many Soviet citizens had opportunities of work they'd never had before. After her early time as a village teacher, Anastasia Denisova had moved to the city.
The revolution opened my eyes to the world. It gave me everything. I was wearing birch bark sandals when I came to Moscow to study. I didn't reach any great heights after studying, but my eyes were opened. Но глаза все-таки открылись.
In 1917, the communists had been a small minority. They'd imposed their idea on their fellow countrymen, hoping to persuade them with the results. But 20 years later, even the early believers knew the promise that the oppressed masses will themselves form the government had not been delivered.
Мы поняли, что это самый главный враг социализма. Значит, мы поняли, что
he was the greatest enemy of socialism.
Этому делу. Тем, что он уничтожил.
He had damaged socialism by destroying people in all parts of life, in agriculture, the arts, the military, and the party. He destroyed people everywhere.
Везде он всех их уничтожил.
Wasn't that evil against those great goals we had in mind?
Злом для той, великой, светлой цели, о которой мы все время говорим.
In the second half of the 1930s alone, over 7 million people were executed, and an estimated 7 million sent to the camps.
There was no socialism of any kind under Stalin. Stalin himself destroyed all socialism. If it hadn't been Stalin, it would have been someone else. Someone would have destroyed this system because, probably, the time had not yet come for such a society.
In the camps, ordinary men and women toiled and died as a result of a political system whose rhetoric and utopian promise became one of the most powerful forces affecting the century. And far from dying, the communist system would go on to dominate the lives of many more people after the end of the Second World War, bringing the same popular hopes and the same vicious realities.